Hey fam, Kaya here again, and I am back with another video. This is video number 4 in the series, The Woman, Her Essence, Her Purpose, Her Role, Her Power, and we are trudging through. So we've got some time to go. So, I mean, I thought that it might be 5-6 videos. This is probably going to go a little bit longer than that, unless I lengthen the videos out and make them a little bit longer, because I have a lot of information I want to share. But as we move through this process, I am extremely excited, because as we go on, we're just the information, to me, it just gets better and better as we go. So I had intended on jumping into Genesis today and spending some time really breaking down who this woman we know as Eve, really Kava, who she is, what the roots of her name are, and how that ties into this, to what it would almost seem like, prophecy and these kind of things. I'm not saying that it does, but you'll see when we get there. I'm not gonna jump ahead of myself, but I am going to repeat what I repeated a little bit in the last video, because when we talk about what prophecy means in some of these things, and even what Yahushua came to do, we're going to see how many of those words actually match up with how she's actually wired. So it's really interesting. It's an interesting thought, and so it's certainly thought provoking. And if you want to, at the end, once that all comes together, it's not like I'm trying to come up with a doctrine, but I just want you to take a look at it, because I do find that it is definitely something to think about. But in the first video, I talked about the foundations. I laid the foundation for first mentioned principle and why that's important. And then in video number 2, I got into 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. Shout out to Brother Judah again, who helped me to really establish a historical perspective for this on the basis of Scripture. And then, in the Bible, I'll say that way, in the New Testament. But, and then in video number 3, I talked about 1 Corinthians. The subject matter was from from the whole chapter of 1 Corinthians chapter 14, really, to be honest. And in terms of that, it really, people pull out just that little part on the woman. They seem to just gravitate to that. I'm not really sure why, but when you really look at the whole chapter, it's not really, I don't really see how that has a lot to do with anything different from the rest of the chapter, because when you really read the chapter, it really is about the edification of the church. And in that chapter, there were certain conditions under which anybody was supposed to keep silent. So if you couldn't have too many people prophesying or bringing a hymn or a song or whatever people wanted to do or share. If you had a certain amount of people, then that was you just needed to remain silent, and that went for men and women. So it wasn't just women. Now, he did address a specific issue that seemed to be a little more particular with women in terms of all the talking and all that kind of stuff. So there were some things that surrounded that, and so in that context, if that wasn't edification, that wasn't something that was going to edify the body, so they just needed to be quiet. So when you look at that and you put that in the context of the rest of the chapter, you just see that's really all that chapter was about. So I got into that in the last video, and then I also talked a lot about prophecy, because I took that word prophesieth, and then we broke that down and got into the root words of that, and we realized it according to what we found, that prophecy can translate as an inspired speaker, teach, instruct, rebuke, comfort, edify, all these different kind of things. And these were the things that women were gifted to be able to do and had the authority to do in the context of a public congregation, men and women. So that if they were doing that, clearly there would have been men there that would have heard that would have been under that instruction or under that teaching, or so it's not something that women can't speak, but this was a context, and Paul was addressing something just to keep order in the church, so the church could be edified. And that's really what 1 Corinthians is all about, chapter 14. So if you don't get a chance, go back and read that. You can go back and watch the last video. And I just want to say that I do appreciate those of you who have taken the time to watch, those of you who have taken the time to view, and to really give your feedback, because I really want to know what you think and how this lines up with what you have thought, your own research. As you go back and you read, what are you coming up with? And these are the kind of things that I just almost covet, and I would love to hear from you. either on Echoes Through Time. Please go back and watch, like, subscribe, comment. On One Love, same thing. So looking forward to hearing from you. And again, I do appreciate, all of those of you who take the time to view, take the time to listen, and leave your comment. It really, it means a lot. So thank you very much. But what I want to do today is I want to start with an article. And just as a heads up, we are going to probably be doing some, I want to say, a substantial amount of reading. And I think I want to forewarn you, because to some people it's not going to be a lot, but for some people it might be. It just depends on the person, really. But in this way, if you want to listen and you want to, just put it down somewhere and just listen, you don't have to watch it. You could just listen. And in that way, the reading would fit really well, because it's almost like a podcast and you're just listening, not a video that you're necessarily watching. But I do want to go ahead and start with this article written by Beth Alpert. Nakhai, it looks like is her name, and it is called Women in Israelite Religion, the State of Research is All New Research. So I want to jump into that, and then I just want to make a couple of comments and kind of lay a foundation for what I want to talk about today. So this was, I actually already put this in the description box, and if the video's on Echoes Through Time, I don't know if it's there. It will probably say see description in the first video, and all of that is there. So you can actually go look this article up if you want to. I'm only going to read the first page. I'm not going to read the whole 11 pages, but I think she brings out some pretty good points, and she's not coming from a Christian perspective, or she's just secular, and but she brings out some good points. I don't agree with everything, but she does bring out some good points. So this was, let's see, this is it's Women in Israelite Religion, the State of Research is All New Research, like I said, by Beth Alpert Nakhai, Arizona Center for Judaic Studies, the University of Arizona, Tucson, Tucson, Arizona, and it was published February 19th, 2019. So that is the information on that. So here we go. European and American exploration of Ottoman Palestine in the 19th and early 20th century was fueled to a great extent by an interest in Israelite religion. Since the lands of the Bible were understood to hold foundational truths about what was commonly understood as the inevitable supremacy of Christianity, the whole region from the Levantine coast to ancient Ur was seen as the geographical and spiritual backdrop of the story of Jesus, a story that highlights exemplary acts by a number of women. How ironic it is, then, that the scholars who engaged in the study of ancient Israel felt no compunction about disregarding the existence of women within Israel's population, thereby eliminating inter alia, among other things, or inter alia, thereby eliminating women's engagement with religion as a topic of discussion. What this means is that most of what scholars have assumed they knew about Israelite religion is wrong, because it has excluded consideration of women and children, that is, consideration of more than half of the population of ancient Israel. Let me stop right there, and then I'll pick it up. I don't know. I don't know if I would say it's completely wrong, but this is what I will say in terms of all these excavations, these things are taking place, and they're kind of glossing over, or have glossed over in the past, the contribution of women, the importance of women in Israelite society, in antiquity. We don't get the whole picture, and I will say that. And maybe if you don't get the whole picture, maybe you could say that. I think that that's kind of left up to the reader to determine if that would be something that you would think that because that's the case, that what they know is wrong. But certainly we don't have the whole picture. It also means that almost everything we know today about women's participation in Israelite religion is newly acquired knowledge. This paper considers the problems created by the exclusion of women from reconstruction of ancient Israel. It then presents a more complete reconstruction, one that incorporates both archaeological and biblical evidence to highlight the spiritual and ritual worlds of women in Iron Age Israel, and that would be 1200 to 587 BCE, or before the Common Era. What does scholarship look like? Only in the past 4 decades have women populated scholarly reconstructions of ancient Israel life, whether religious or historical or anything else. And this is not to say that in the past 40 years, women have been included in all reconstructions of Israel's past. So you have a predominantly a field that is pretty much dominated, I guess I would say, by males. And it's only been in the past 40 years that women have been involved in that. And even with that being in the past 40 years, they haven't even been involved in every aspect of that, even in the past 40 years. So they're just kind of, this is pretty recent in terms of women actually getting in and being a part of reconstructing what they know archaeologically, excavating and pulling all these things up and seeing what women's roles were in ancient Israel. And this is something that is largely spearheaded by women. So that should tell you something right there. And I'm going to get into that because a lot of times people's status in society has a lot to do with how they're determined and what their contributions, how well that those things are highlighted. And we'll get into that in a few minutes probably. But it has been surprisingly easy, for example, for male Bible scholars and archaeologists to write about daily life, the quotidian responsibilities upon which all of life's grand activities are predicated, and to exclude women. One has to wonder who they thought was doing all that work. And we're going to get into that as well, because there were things that made other things possible. Sometimes people and events that we see at the forefront, we forget that there are other things that are going on behind the scenes that make what we see possible. And we kind of skirt over it, and we never really even consider or think about it. But if there were not things that took place in the background, if you will, then we would not necessarily see what we see at the forefront. And you'll understand what I mean by that as we get more into this. It is as easy as it has been to exclude Israelite women when discussing the responsibilities of chores of daily life. Easier still, it has been to exclude their active role in Israelite religion. This point is particularly critical, excuse me. This point is particularly critical because there is, in many people's eyes, a direct link between the religion of ancient Israel and the modern-day Judaism and Christianity. Therefore, reconstruction of women's roles in biblical antiquity have influenced expectations for women's roles in contemporary society. And we can certainly see that there is truth to that because of how many times people actually look back, individuals will look back to that and say, oh, this is what I didn't see women do very much, so they're not supposed to do that much today. Or this is the way that it seems like this narrative is. And so because this is the way that this narrative is played out, or it seems that way, that this is what women are supposed to do today, or this is what women are not supposed to do. So what we saw in antiquity in ancient Israel to a great degree has influenced the expectation of women today. Not just Israel, antiquity in the nation of Israel, but also ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And we saw that in Timothy. So as we're going through this article, these are some of the points that I want to bring out, because these are some of the points that I said earlier where she makes some very valid points. And as we go back to Genesis, I do want to talk about the pre-fallen state, because a lot of times what we're trying to do is we're trying to build an expectation of someone based on what is fallen, and most of the ancient biblical narrative is after the fall. So again, like I said in video 1, we're dealing with fallen systems, we're dealing with people with fallen natures, we're dealing with a fallen world, and we cannot build Yah's intent on something that is fallen, because Yah is not going to establish his kingdom on what is fallen. And so we have to look at what he originally intended and what the first mentioned principle was to actually establish what his will is concerning women or any other element of what he has created, any other element of anything in creation. What accounts for the unduly limited attention that traditional scholarship has paid to religious ritual and belief as experienced by Israelite women? This question must be answered in the first place by stressing that it is not correct to assume, as scholars have traditionally done, that women did not matter in ancient religion. As it turns out, the near absence of women in the Bible is not because women had no religious lives, but rather because women were not players within the monarchical, prophetic, priestly, scribal, and other dominant communities that crafted the demonstrably androcentric Bible. However, the narrow lens of the Hebrew Bible has been, until recent decades, the primary lens through which scholars have engaged with Israelite religion. I don't know if it's as narrow as she thinks. I think if we really dig, we can see that it may be wider than what we think, because it maybe there are just things that we haven't quite paid attention to. Clearly, like I said, women are not nearly written about as much as men are, so we are talking about something that is slightly androcentric, meaning that it's something that is favoring men. In just in terms of the majority of the what you might call the primary actors, and in that way, not favoring men in the sense of their value and men being more important. So, but sometimes when we look at that and we see that they were the primary players in this narrative, then we can begin to think that primary means important, or that if it's something or someone does not seem to be primary, that person is less important. And as we're going to see, that is the furthest thing from the truth, when it comes to women. So the other thing I wanted to bring out is I just want to push back a little bit on one thing, because women were players in the prophetic, and we'll see that actually they played a pretty tremendous role in that. And most of the time when women were gifted, this is the area they were gifted in, because we're going to look at the different prophetesses, not just in the Old Testament, but we already looked at Anna, and we're going to see how that was the case. And really, when many women, like for example, Miriam, the mother of Yahushua, when she conceived and she went to see Elizabeth, her cousin, she prophesied, Elizabeth prophesied. That's not to say they were prophetesses, but it's just, if you really take a look, it's really interesting to see how many women operated in this gift. And when we get to how she's wired, I think that we're going to get a better understanding of why so many women operated in this gift, in this gift of prophecy. So let's see here. Who we next ask are the scholars who so misrepresented the roles of women in Israelite religion, whether priests, ministers, rabbis, or professors, whether seminary educated or university trained. They generally have been men who owed their intellectual heritage to that long line of male scholars who began writing sacred text in Israel's Iron Age, and who have been interpreting it ever since. Just as men monopolized the religious leadership from ancient times to modernity, so too have men dominated the study of ancient Israel and its religion. Like biblical scholars, archaeologists who have often held theological degree have typically focused on the bastions of male authority and elite governance, choosing to excavate palaces and temples, city walls and gates. In short, the exclusion of Israelite women as a topic of scholarly study has been, albeit unwittingly, predicated upon a belief system that has supported male privilege and suppressed women's agency, meaning that the biases of the past have been perpetuated in the present. So again, we see what she's talking about, the biases of the past, those almost prejudices that we see in the past, this androcentric attitude that it seems like that sometimes people can get from this. We see this whole thing continue to be perpetuated even now. And this goes back to how many, I'll say, the issue that, that so many people have with women when it comes to women speaking or really doing anything other than what they would determine that women should do. And some of that is based on this ancient biblical narrative. But at the same time, if you really look at the ancient biblical narrative, that doesn't even fit what a lot of these people hold to. That women pretty much can't do anything but, what they have determined that women can do. And I'll leave it at that. Let's see here. What then have such reconstructions of Israelite religion look like? They have been, in short, androcentric, favoring men, the temple and its priests, the Jerusalem royalty and other elites. They have accepted the biblical trope that vilifies the practice of community and private religion, and as they do so, they have perpetuated the erasure of women from the story of Israel. The cumulative impact of these factors upon the reconstruction of women's roles in ancient Israelite is clear. In ancient Israelite religion is clear. The marginalization of women in roles, the marginalization of women's roles in ancient Israel religion has served to validate the marginalization of women throughout millennia. And I do believe that that is a true statement, that women are marginalized, and they have been for millennia. They really have. The way that they've been treated, the way that they've been, you look at Dinah, Jacob's daughter, and this happened a lot of the times where they, in those societies at that time, a man just saw a woman that he liked and just took her and did whatever he wanted with her. I mean, we would, we might call that today paramount to rape. And, some people may say that that's, dramatic and theatrical, but that is the reality that they did that. I mean, you look at Sarah, she was taken twice. And that's why Abraham was fearful when he went into these communities, because they would just come and if they saw a woman they liked, and just take her. And she didn't have a choice. She didn't have a say. She didn't have, over anything. And so we look at these things and how women have been marginalized and just kind of treated like property, or, oh, I want that, so let me go take it. And not even considering the fact that this is an individual, this is a human being, this is a person, and they feel things about things. And so we're going to get into that as we get more into this. But certainly, we would want to watch if we are taking that. This is what I would call more of an imperialistic mindset. I just go and take what I want. I don't care how it impacts people or how it affects people. I just take what I want. And as a people, we can understand, as so-called Black people, we get, and Native Americans and anybody who this has been done to, which has been done to a whole slew of people, but that things that Yah, given them as their heritage was, people have just come and just taken it without, slaughtered them, killed them, raped their women, just taking whatever they wanted. And we get it with that. But sometimes when it comes to women, we don't really see how all of these things play out. And so many times women had a double whammy, because it wasn't just that the things were taken, but then they were also taken. So it wasn't that just the resources were taken and utilized, but then women were also taken and utilized. And so we don't always see this deep oppression of women from ancient times. And many times people look back at that, and they will read these passages and the biblical narrative, and for some reason that will justify their attitude towards women today. And it's not the right attitude, because it's not what Yah originally established in the beginning. So we're going to get more into that. So that is that article. So let's see here what I want to talk about next. So I think I covered everything I wanted to talk about with that article. So what I want to jump into right now is, no, I think there is. I think I have some notes that I want to share, and make some comments, and then we're going to actually get into the scripture, and we're going to get into that very shortly here. So, one of the things I want to talk about is one of the things that she says in this article that I didn't bring out. And this is why I like to have my notes, because I'll look back and go, I really wanted to share that point, and I didn't get to it, and then I'm aggravated. And so I don't know if I expounded on this enough, because I did talk about the things that were going on in the background that make things possible. So here it says, it has been surprisingly easy, for example, for male Bible scholars and archaeologists to write about daily life, the quotidian responsibilities upon which all life's grand activities are predicated, and to exclude women. One has to wonder who they thought was doing all that work. And one of these is gonna play into exactly what I want to talk about. So again, when we talk about the daily life, and we talk about the things that were taking place in the background that made all these other things that we see possible in ancient Israel, I want you to think for a minute about a play. If you went to see a play, and when you went there, they had the character all dressed up, and that was all you saw. But there were no props, there was no music, there was nothing else that was going on. Think about how much you would actually know about that story. Think about how much you would know about the storyline if they were just like, saying what their script, talking about, repeating their script, whatever they're supposed to say, and there was nothing else. There were no other characters. There was nothing else going on. You would know, because even though when we look at a play, we don't really pay attention to the props as much. Sometimes we don't, pay attention to the seemingly secondary, we'll say, characters. We don't pay attention but all of these things in a play, the music, all these things help us understand the setting, the plot, the where something took place, the when, the why, the who, the where. These are all things that we would not know. We would not have a clue if we didn't have all of that stuff. It's what makes the main part of a story possible. It gives flesh and meat, and it makes it possible for them to bring it forth and to actually present what this story actually is. And when we look at the scripture, a lot of times I think that we forget the things that are going on in the background. And it is these things that seemingly went on in the background that made things possible. But the thing that we don't want to forget is because, just because we don't necessarily see women necessarily, we see them, but not to the degree, nearly to the degree that we see men. And here I wrote is in ancient Israel life was taking place. So we talked about the play, and we don't really pay that much attention to these seemingly non-essential characters, but it is these seemingly non-essential characters and the props and all these other things that like I said, make other things possible. For far too often we don't see women in these societies in the biblical narrative in what we might deem as primary roles. And because they don't have primary roles, it's been assumed far too often that they don't have important roles. And this is what I really want to talk about today, because just because we don't see them in a primary role doesn't mean that person is not important, or that what they're doing is not important, because as we're going to see, a lot of these seemingly non-primary roles are very essential. So, we might almost want to think of them as an essential, worker in some ways, because without them, without some of those individuals, mostly probably who were women who filled these spaces seemingly on the periphery, what we see in the center, what happened at the periphery makes what we see in the center possible. What we see in the center cannot happen without what's going on in the periphery. So life was happening, and many times it was women who filled these essential roles, even though they have been looked at as non-essential to a great degree, and to a great degree has caused people to put a certain value on women, on their role, what their role was in ancient Israelite religion. So this idea that primary and important are always synonymous is not necessarily the case. And like I said, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it as first of order in time, in order, in time, or in development. And we'll see that when we get to Genesis. There is an order. There's clearly an order, but that doesn't mean that male man is more important because he was formed first. So that doesn't mean that. And we're going to get into that as well. So let's take a look at what some of these women did. Some of these, what we might call non-essential roles, and see how they played into how that impacted Israel as a nation. And the first place I want to go to is Exodus. So let's turn over to the book of Exodus. If you have your Bibles, you can turn there too. And this is Exodus. We're going to actually start with chapter 1. And I am going to read verses 15 through 21. All right, let's see here. And this is when things were really, turning bad for Israel at this time. And the stage was being set because Yah was going to, be delivering them. So sometimes things get a certain way because of what Yah is planning to do. So it says here, then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, whom the name of the one was Shiphrah, and the other Puah. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stools. If it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. You're going to see a little hiccup in probably about, just probably like 2 minutes. And so I just want to give you a heads up, because this video is going to be a little bit longer. I'm going to put them together and we're just going to write this out for probably about an hour. So you're going to see a little hiccup, but just know that that's going to happen, and then it'll click, and then I'll come right back in. So, just a heads up. So we are looking at when the king of Egypt gave this decree, and he said, kill all the boys to the midwives, and if it is a girl, you can let her live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was because the midwives feared God that he provided households for them. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. I read a couple of more verses than I intended to read, but I wanted to read that because we're talking about two women. At least what it says, those particular women. I don't know if they were the only two, but they certainly were two of the main ones. And there were probably a myriad of baby boys, countless baby boys, who survived because of the bravery and the courage of these women. The love, the compassion, the desire for justice that these two midwives showed, and because of that, Yah blessed them. But we don't always look at that. This might have been taking place on the periphery, but what we see is the survival of potentially half the population, because these two midwives honor Yah. So that's the first one. A lot of times, like I said, we look at women and we look at the things that they do in the scripture, but this right here, we might not think of this as primary. We might think of this as secondary, but I want you to think if this was your son. If your wife was giving birth and there was some kind of decree, God forbid, like that, and they saved your son alive, would their role be primary then? Would they be important at that time? Of course they would. So it's not just a personal thing, but we're looking at a whole nation, and they were working to save baby boys alive, even though the king had said, kill them. So again, these are some of the very important roles that women played, and because they did this, Yah blessed them. So this is where, so we're going to move on now, and we're going to talk a little bit about Moses' mother in chapter 2. So Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn there, and I'm going to read that. A man from the house of Levi went and took as a wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, the same stuff that Moses used, it seems, in the beginning. That's kind of interesting. With asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent the maids to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrew children. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. And so the maid went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. So I am going to stop right there because, again, we are looking at not just Moses' mother. So the first thing I want to bring out, which just kind of came to me as I was looking at this, it was Moses' mother that, built the ark, that put Moses in it at a time when Moses would have most definitely been killed. And, put him in an ark and sent him off because she wanted to protect him. Obviously, as a mom, she wanted him to survive. But she wasn't the only one that Yah used in this story to bring salvation to this baby, to save him alive. He also used Pharaoh's daughter, also a woman who, I don't know what the role of women in ancient Egypt was in terms of what their status was like. If it was similar to that in ancient Israel, it may have been. We're talking about, two cultures that were very much intermingled and intermixed with each other. But when we're looking at this, she may not be considered. A lot of people don't even consider her probably when they read the book of Exodus. But she was very important in this because had she not found him and had she not called, one of the Hebrew women, which was his own mom, to nurse him, and then she was able to bring Moses back to her, and then he was known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, then he would have been killed. So she, in a way, also played in this whole process of Moses being saved and then becoming, the main person that Yah used to deliver his people out of Egypt. Now, the other thing that I wanted to bring out is Moses' mother. So as she had him and she was nursing him, one of the things I looked up, and I'll give you the link to it later, because I looked up about how long was it that Hebrew children, when they were weaned, like how long did their moms breastfeed them, did they nurse them? And it was probably till about 3 years, somewhere between, they said it could be up to 5 years, but that's more in contemporary society. But most of the time, by 3 years old, a Hebrew child was weaned. So for those first 3 years, when Moses' mom had him and she was nursing him every single day, and she had a chance to hold him and rock him and sing to him and tell him about his history, even at 3 years old, speak over him and bless him, and all these things were taking place. These are also things that could have possibly set the trajectory for the rest of his life, so that when Yah called him, he had these things in him. And while it doesn't say it in this particular passage, I think somewhere we can find it in, I don't know if it's somewhere else in the Bible, the Bible, or in the Apocrypha or somewhere, but I do believe there's somewhere else that talks about Moses' father. And in these 3 years, we don't even know what his father put into him. But we are talking about women right now, and in this, what we see right here in this particular passage is how Yah used two women, really three, because you talk about the maiden, Miriam, his sister, his older sister, I don't know how old she was, but she may have been quite a few years older than him. And she went to see what was going to happen. And it was her who connected Pharaoh's daughter with Moses' biological mother. So her bringing those two women together. And because of that, Moses, the first 3 years of his life, which are very important years, he got to spend in the arms of his mother. So this is, when we look at these kind of things, and we can kind of gloss over these things, and then we just look at, oh, okay, yeah, that happened. But now let's, read about Moses. Well, there wouldn't be a Moses if it was not for these women, the woman who not only gave birth to him, but also realized there's something special about him, and went to build this ark and strategized to send him down the river. And then his sister followed along to see what would happen to him, kind of watching over to see, and then ensured that when that ark was found, that she directed her back to the mom. So you look at how Yah used women, even young ones, like what Miriam was at the time, however old she was. And we see how Yah used women to bring these things about. But these are, again, these things that are taking place on the parameter, and we're just looking at what's taking place in the center, and we don't realize how, if these things that are taking place seemingly in the background or on the periphery, of these events. If these things had not taken place, I didn't mean parameter, I meant the periphery. But if those things weren't taking place, then how could we have the main event? Because there would not be nothing to base it upon. Without the mom building the ark, Moses would have been killed. There would have been no ark. There would have been no, floating down the river. Miriam, if she hadn't done her part, we don't know what would have happened. She may have called another Hebrew woman and it might have been something totally different. So, you see how these kind of things work. Rebecca. Her story is in Genesis chapter 25, verse 21 through 28. And I'm going to go there. I'm not going to read every single one because some of them are long. And so in the ones that are long, I'm just going to relay it. I'm not going to actually do it. But the ones that are a little bit short, like this one's only 7 verses, I'm going to take the time to read it. And if you want to read along, you can follow along. You can also do that. So this is 25, and I'm going to start with verse 21 and be reading through verse 28. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea. And Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If all is well, why am I like this?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people shall be separated from your body. 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over, so they called his name Esau. And afterwards his brother came out. His hand took hold of Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So here we can see where Yah spoke to Rebekah from the very beginning about these 2 babies who were actually 2 nations within her womb. And before they were born, she already knew that the older one was going to serve the younger one. She already knew that the younger one was chosen. So when we look at her, a lot of times we might look at her as a deceiver, as somebody who did something underhanded. And I'm not saying that she didn't, to be honest with you, but what I am saying is whatever the case was, whatever her temperament was, even if she had a propensity to those kind of things, it was still something that Yah used. And she was working in line with what Yah had already willed. So we can read in Romans chapter 9, verse 13, where it says, before either one of the babies were born, they have the opportunity to do anything good or wicked or anything else. Jacob I have loved, and Esau I have hated. So Yah had chosen Jacob before the foundations. Jacob was the one who was chosen. So in her doing these things, we could look at that as, oh my gosh, how could she do that? But understanding that she was working in line with what Yah had spoken. And so there was probably a reason why Jacob was more special to her heart. It didn't mean that she didn't love her son Esau, but Jacob had a special place in her heart. And because of that, and because of what Yah had told her, then when the time came, she seized the moment. She took that opportunity and she did that. And it was in line with what Yah wanted. So there we see also Rebekah, her having a hand in Jacob actually getting the blessing. And because he got the blessing, and Yah made the covenant with Abraham, then Yah made the covenant with Isaac, and then comes Jacob, we see this whole thing, this Abrahamic blessing begin to play out in Jacob's life. And also Jacob, even though he went in and it seems okay, he deceived his father, he probably had a propensity for these kinds of things. We do kind of see that in that family. But whatever the temperament was in whatever it was in that family, because we also see it with Laban, he was a little shady. Yah still used that, and so he went in and deceived his father, which was not necessarily a right thing to do. But as soon as he leaves and flees because Esau's angry, all of a sudden he has an encounter with the Most High. So the Most High doesn't say, oh, you were wrong. He literally says, I'm going to establish my covenant with you. So we see all these things happen because he had that dream with that ladder, the angels ascending and descending. and this power that was of this heavenly power that was going to be over him to bless him, that was, gonna this power of heaven that was going to be resident in him and through him on earth as he went. Next was Samuel's mother, and her story is in chapters 1 and 2 of the book of 1 Samuel. And this is where I got that, where I looked at this, how old a Hebrew child was when they were weaned. And this is from www.basslibrary.org. Then it has a little arrow, and then biblical-archaeology-review. And so I'll put that in the description box. But here it says the ancient Hebrews completed weaning at about 3 years. So you think about this. This woman took her 3-year-old son, and she was taking him to a place where he was going to remain forever. And she left him there. She had asked Yah for him. Yah had honored her prayer and given her a son. And now, after she had weaned him, she took him and she left him there. But for those first 3 years, like with Moses' mom, what did she speak over him in those 3 years? During that time that she was breastfeeding him and nursing him. And how did that set the trajectory for the rest of Samuel's life? Those words of life, those blessings, everything that, as a Hebrew mother, that she spoke over her son, that she instilled in him. He may not have been completely aware of it, but Hannah was a godly woman. And if you ever read chapters 1 and 2, you will see she was, unfortunately, I want to say, antagonized by her rival, the other wife. But Elkanah loved Hannah, and he gave her a double portion whenever they went up. And so Yah blessed Hannah and gave her Samuel, and because she gave him back to the Lord, as she had said, Yah blessed her, and she was able to have more children. But we see how Yah used Samuel. And we might not always look at this desire that she even had in her heart that was from the Lord. We might not look at her as a major player in that, but she was a major player, because she, number one, asked Yah for Samuel, and then number two, when it came down to it, in those first 3 years she had with him, we know she probably spoke into his life. I mean, it doesn't say that, but we could probably deduce that those first 3 years that she had with him were extremely special years, because she knew that for the rest of the time she wasn't gonna necessarily have him there. But we do read, as you read on, you will see that she made him a little ephod every time she went up. Ephod. She went up. She sold him different things and took him and these different things and helped him in the service that he was destined to do, and that he was anointed to do, and that Yah had pretty much given him that call and that assignment on his life. And so she still continued to aid in that. And we don't really see that part, but she at least did get to see him every year when they went up. So these are things that a lot of times I'm saying, like going back to the article that we read, a lot of times when women are glossed over, but they played a major role when it came to the major things that happened that we see in the scripture. And had they not played these roles, these things would not have been possible. So you might say that women were the foot soldiers, that made these things possible. And because of that, my prayer is that we will begin to change not only how we see women in this biblical narrative, but as we change how we see women in this ancient biblical narrative, that we will change our perception of what women can do and what we expect, these limitations we put on women and what we think they can do and they can't do. And that will help to kind of alter how we see women's roles today. Rahab, another one. Let's go to the book of Joshua. This one I do kind of want to get into a little bit and read a little bit of. Joshua chapter 2. Okay. Let's see what I want to read here. Joshua chapter, actually, you know what, I don't think I'm going to read chapter 2. I think I'm just going to go to chapter 6, but I'm just going to give a little bit of background. because we know that Yah had, they were to go in, and Yah was upset with them at the time. I mean, if you go back, you can read it, why he got upset with them, because they were supposed to, clear everybody out, and they hadn't really done that. And so there were some consequences, but you could go read that. But, they went in and to spy out the land. Joshua sent 2 spies in, and when they got in there, they went to Rahab's house, and she was a harlot. She was a prostitute. So after, they got to her house, and she knew that it was destined, that she knew Yah was the Most High, and she knew he had sent him the spies and what was going to happen. And so she explained to them, you know what, we heard all this stuff that Yah did, like all the stuff that happened to Egypt and all this other stuff, like we heard all these things, and we are literally terrified. Like there's no strength left within anybody because of what we heard that Yah did through you and for you. And we know, she knew that that was going to happen to her, to her people. She understood that that was going to happen, and she acknowledged that. And so, when there was, it was known that some spies from the children of Israel had come in, and they wanted to capture them. So they sent a couple of their people to see, they called Rahab out and said, "Where are these men? We know they came to your house." And she said, "Well, they were here, but they left, and to be honest with you, where they went after they left, they went outside the gates of the city. I don't know where they went. If you go after them, you can probably pursue them." And so, and catch up with him. And so she had hit them on her roof under some flags. And so because of that, she said, "Because I've been kind when this happens, because I know this is going to happen, spare my life, spare the life of my family." And so the same scarlet, rope or whatever it was that she had, that she let down out of the window that the men went down on, they just said, "Leave that hanging out, and we're going to spare you and your family. But as long as they don't go out of the house, if they go out of the house, then, you're done for. But as long as you stay in and we see that thread, then you will be saved." So, and that's a whole other message in itself, which maybe we'll get to at another time. But, so it says here, this is when they, marched around Jericho 7 times, and on the 7th time the walls fell. So this is where chapter 6, verse 20 starts. "So the people shouted when the priests blew the trumpets. And it happened when the people heard the sound of the trumpet that the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell flat, and the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and took the city. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, ox, sheep, donkey, and donkey with the edge of the sword. But Joshua had said to the 2 men who spied out the country, go into the harlot's house, and from there bring out the woman and all she has, as she swore to you." And the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother, her brothers, and all that she had. So they brought out all her relatives and left them outside of the camp. But they burned the city and all that was in it with fire. Only the silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. And Joshua spared Rahab the harlot, her father's household, and all that she had. So she dwells in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. So there we have it. We have a prostitute, a harlot, who some people would just write off and say she's not worth anything, she's this, she's that, but yet Yah used this woman, and Yah saved her alive. And what is really interesting about Rahab is that Rahab is justified in the book of James, chapter 2, verse 25. It literally says Rahab was justified by her works in receiving the messengers and sent them out another way, because Yah's justice was being done. Yah intended to wipe those nations out, and she played a prominent role in that. And because she did, she was justified, the scripture says. Her story is also in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31. She's in the Hall of Faith. We see her in the book of Matthew, that somebody married her. I believe his name was Salmon, but he married her, and so she ended up becoming part of the nation of Israel, and she became the mother of, I believe it was Boaz, and And then Boaz married Ruth, who was a Moabitess. And then they had Obed, and Obed had Jesse, and Jesse had King David. So she was King David's great grandmother. So you see how Yah blessed her, and then she was also an ancestress in the line of Yahushua. So she's in that whole lineup. This was a harlot. And so this harlot, this woman, who was not only, she was a woman, but she was a harlot. She played a major role in this whole thing. Because she provided this pathway where they could come in. And because she created this pathway where they could come in and knew what Yah was going to do, Yah, it made that more possible, but at the same time, Yah blessed her because of it. So we see her playing this role. So this seemingly insignificant woman who was a harlot was not only justified in the sight of God, saved herself and her family from certain death, but she became an ancestress in the line of our Messiah. And she was the great grandmother, like I said, of King David. So that is Rahab. So the last two women I want to look at are Jael, or Yael, and Deborah. And their story is found in the book of Judges, chapter 4. So we're going to go there because that's right after the book of Joshua. And after Joshua died, they started doing evil again, which was not unusual for our forefathers. It's just, I don't know. It seemed like they were just on a mission to do evil. So I know sometimes people try to, paint a rosy picture, but these folks were stiff-necked. And we have to pray that we don't have that, walk in that same way. So let's see here. So let's look at this here. So when Ehud was dead, the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, but it's pronounced in the Hebrew Yavin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera. So this was the commander of the army of Hazor. And he served under King Yavin. The commander of his army was Sisera, who dwelt in Harosheth Hagoyim. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, for Yavin had 900 chariots of iron, and for 20 years he had harshly oppressed the children of Israel. Now Deborah was a prophetess, the wife of Lapodith. She was judging Israel at that time. And she would sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the mountains of Ephraim. And the children of Israel came up to her for judgment. I'm going to stop right there for a minute, because here it says, this woman, Deborah, she was a prophetess. And she sat under, I guess, what was known as the palm tree of Deborah. And the children of Israel, the whole nation, because the nation wasn't separated at this time. They hadn't separated yet. David hadn't been born, Solomon. They were still unified. And so they would come up to her for judgment. Now, one of the words for judgment is rule. And she would pronounce sentence. She would, if somebody needed to be punished, she would pronounce punishment. But they came to her. This was men and women, the whole nation. And so when I go back and I talk about how what we see in the book of Timothy and Corinthians does not fit with the pattern laid out in Scripture, this is one of the first ones that we're looking at. It doesn't fit, because if Yah never intended women to be in these positions, Deborah wouldn't have been in this position. And clearly it says, one Bible translation says she ruled Israel at that time. So, but definitely she was a judge. Yah had raised her up at that time. She heard the word of the Lord. She had the wisdom of Yah. She administrated. She did all these different things. And Yah used her. And I'm going to share a little bit of my notes as well. But it says, then she sent and called for Barak, the son of Abino, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, has not the Lord God of Israel commanded, go and deploy troops at Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men of the sons of Naphtali and of the sons of Zebulun. And against you I will deploy Sisera. I'm going to cause him to come out to fight you. the commander of Yavin's army, with his chariots and his multitude at the river Kishon, and I will deliver him into your hand. And Barak said to her, if you will go with me, then I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. So she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, there will be no glory for you. No glory for you in the journey you are taking for the Lord. For the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. So Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. And Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and he went up with the 10,000 men under his command, and Deborah went with him. Now Heber, the Kenite of the children of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, had separated himself from the Kenites and pitched his tent near the terebinth tree at Zanaim, which is beside Kadesh. And they reported to Sisera that Barak, the son of Abinom, had gone up to Mount Tabor. So Sisera gathered together his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the people who were with him. This was a big army. Probably with, pretty good technology when it came to fighting. Who were with him from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river Kishon. Then Deborah said to Barak, up, for there is this day in which the Lord has delivered for this day in which the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hand. Has not the Lord gone out before you? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. And so I'm going to read a little bit more because I want to get into Jael's story. And the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. And Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot. But Barak pursued the chariot and the army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not one man was left. However, Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber, the Kenite. For there was peace between Yavin, the king of Hazor, and the house of Heber, the Kenite. And Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me. Do not fear. And when she turned aside with her into the tent, she covered him with a blanket. Then she said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. So she opened a jug of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. Then he said to her, stand at the door of the tent. If any man comes and inquires of you and says, is there any man here? You shall say no. Then Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple, and it went down into the ground, for he was fast asleep and weary. So he died. And then, as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him and said to him, come, I will show you the man whom you seek. And when he went into her tent, there lay Sisera dead with a peg in his temple. So that is this whole story. Now, what I want to do real quick is just kind of share a little something I wrote down here. Barak, a man. This was a man. Followed the command of the Lord through Deborah, a woman, a prophetess, and defeated the king of the opposing army through a woman. The whole of the children of Israel sang a song, and one of the things that they sang is most blessed among women is Jael. So though often unseen, belittled, disregarded, many of their actions, like I said, in the biblical narrative, like we see with Deborah, like we see as Jael, though a lot of times that's downplayed, like Yah didn't have a man, but he did. He sent Barak. That was the commander. So a man was there. But we see how Yah anointed these women and how they played these prominent roles in ancient Hebrew society. From what we saw with Deborah and Jael, who administered, who, were victorious in battle. Many women, for rearing their children, teaching their children, caring for their husbands, and providing for their families. Their actions, though often overlooked and, like I said, regarded as unimportant, is insignificant, they create the foundation and the backdrop upon and against which the majority of the primary biblical events take place. So again, going back to this biblical narrative, we want to kind of, hopefully it's through some of these things that we look at and we read about, that we can change the way that we regard women. Because as we're going to see in Genesis, what male man got, female got, because they both got the same breath. So there are these human abilities that both of them have. And we don't ever want to forget that when it comes to women, that women were not meant to exist on the periphery. They did, but even existing on the periphery, they did great and mighty things. So with that, I'm going to close up, and we're going to hopefully be able to jump into Genesis in the next one. Certainly that's the plan, and I think that we'll be able to do that. So with that, I'm going to say have a wonderful day. This is Friday, so it is, later on today. The sun's not down, but it will be Shabbat, and we'll be celebrating Shabbat, taking our rest, and honoring the Yah in that way. And so I want to say have a beautiful, beautiful Sabbath. Enjoy your families, enjoy your children. May Yah bless you and keep you. May He make His face shine upon you. May He be gracious to you. May He grant you peace. May He grant you wisdom and for whatever you need in life right now. And with that, I will say shalom. We'll talk next time.